All right, we're back. We are Game 2015 in the winter 2018 semester at George Brown, and we are week 7. We're talking about an intro to animation in Blender, and again, just a few administrative items. Your alpha release is due next week, Friday by midnight, right? Some teams haven't really gotten a lot of traction from that perspective. Please don't wait. And your second iteration that's due on Pivotal Tracker is also due the same day. So please remember to get that started. If you haven't started already, it's due again next week, Friday. So we just finished, this video on the 12 principles of animation. People who haven't seen it, I have put a link up on Slack. If you want to watch it again, I will focus on a little bit about this, not very much, obviously, maybe a question or two on the exam that's happening next week. So there's an exam for this course, just as a reminder. I will make it available starting on Wednesday of next week. So Wednesday to Friday, you'll have 3 days to do it, right? It'll be a take-home exam. So there will be still labs in class and all that kind of stuff. It'll be 80% that's going to be based on the stuff that Ilir's been talking about, which is Agile. So please make sure you study that stuff. The stuff from the book that he's presented to you in the past, as well as other things. And then that 20%, I'm going to be actually adding some stuff around Blender and Unity and VR, some of the stuff I've covered. So please take a look at these videos that I'm showing you today, as well as some of the material that I've put up on Slack, some links to Slack and all that kind of stuff. If you have a chance to watch that 12 Principles of Animation again, it's not going to hurt you to get a further understanding. There's also some really great resources online to look about that as well. Good news also is we've received our head-mounted displays that we're going to be using. So I've looked at them today. Alex shared with me where they are and all that. I have access to them. So starting next Wednesday, I will try and bring 10 sets in, if I can, to the class. So if you have your game that you want to port over now, I know some people have kind of made a game for AGLX that is not VR-based. You want to port it over, next week is the week. So that also next week, you're going to be testing your alpha release. It's a great opportunity to put it on your head-mounted display. So you need an Android device to make it run well. If you don't run it with an Android device and you're using iOS, then you're going to have some other control scheme because Android works great with an Xbox controller, either the one that plugs in directly from micro USB to micro USB into the Android device, or the one that is with Bluetooth, which is your Xbox One S controller and up, has Bluetooth, and it connects with most Android devices as well. So that's a great way of connecting using Unity to control your VR game. So all that's due next week. That's what we're going to be doing. But for this week, we're going to be talking about Blender and Unity, like before. So I'm bringing up Blender here. And what I want to do here is I just want to hide these two objects. I'm not going to really talk about the camera too much or the light. So I'm just going to press H to hide them. And what I want to do here is I want to make this cube in this first part of the scene, I want to make it fall and bounce. That's what I really want to do. Fall, bounce, and when it falls and bounces, it's going to go in a particular direction. So we're going to try and improve it. We're going to try and do a couple versions of this, and I'm going to move fairly quickly. So you should know, my assumption is you should know some basics about Blender at this point. If you don't know the basics about Blender, then you should pretty much look at the previous videos to try and get an idea of how to do certain things. But let's start off with this. So we want our cube here in, from this perspective, to bounce. But how do we keep track of animations in Blender? Well, even though we haven't used it, there is an area below the view screen right here that is actually our animation timeline. So it actually is always there. It was just something that we never really used in our default view, right? So I'm going to start off with this idea of pose-to-pose animation, or using keyframes. And I'm going to do that by turning the lights up. All right, so pose-to-pose means, and again, going with that, one of the principles of animation, pose-to-pose and straight ahead. Pose-to-pose means you use keyframes in order for you to do your animation. And what we're going to do is interpolate between the keyframes. So I'm going to use some basic keyframes. So the first one is our base pose. Now, obviously, I want this cube to be to fall, and it's got to start at some position. So I'm going to kind of just scroll out here, and I'm going to right-click on the cube, and I'm going to set it up where it should start off. So way up here, the cube's going to start off before falling, and I want to capture this. And the way to capture a keyframe is have your mouse centered in the viewport in the middle and press the I key. When you do that, you have a menu that comes up that says, hey, what kind of information do you want to capture? Keyframes in Blender, we can capture certain pieces of information. For example, location, rotation, scale, location and rotation, location, rotation, and scale, the whole thing, or some other information here. So if you only just want location, then you just click on this one. But typically what I like to do is capture it all. So click on this one. Notice it makes this area here in the bottom, it highlights it in yellow. And that kind of signifies that, hey, we've captured a keyframe. The first keyframe is on frame 1. And notice how many frames we have to work with right now. By default, Blender gives you 250 frame animation. That is way too long. So let's cut that way down. So let's make it so for now, let's start off with 30 frames. I'm going to kind of go down in here and change this to 30 frames. And then now we have a much smaller animation, but we want to zoom in there. So you can use the, when my mouse, not here, but actually down in here, if I scroll in, like we normally do, and if I press the Shift and middle scroll wheel, I can actually move this to the middle. So I actually move it. So if I scroll in, you can see more details about the frame. So I've got like 0, frame 1, frame 5, frame 10, and so on. So we started off with frame 1, and you can see on the bottom left-hand corner that the cube right now has been captured at frame 1. Okay, going with the principles of animation, I want to, as I'm moving down, I want the cube to stretch, right? As it's moving down the screen, right? So again, animation principle number 1, stretch and squash. What we're going to do is we're going to move our scrubber. This is our scrubber, which is this green line down here. If I move it to frame 5, as an example, again, I'm just going to do a linear animation here. And if I grab the blue manipulator arm here on the Z-axis, I want to move my object so it's closer to the ground. So I'm going to zoom in here. Okay, so I'm just going to move this up here, and I'm just going to take this away, the toolbar, to give us more real estate. So here I am, right? So I'm moving it further down here, so that it moves from the initial position to this position. So what I want to do, 12 principles of animation say that if I'm going to stretch something in one dimension, in one axis, I got to squash it in another one, right? So I'm going to bring up the numeric keypad here, and you can see that in the Z direction, I want to be twice as big. So let's say, and again, you can use whatever proportions you want. But in the X and Y dimensions, I want to go half as big. So it kind of gives us this idea that when one line smooths out one way, then on the other lines, we kind of come in the other way. So this is kind of make that stretching thing. And it's not exactly perfect. We probably want to be a little bit wider than half on the X and Y axis to give that the sense of volume. But this is what I want to capture here. So this is the first keyframe away from the base pose, which is way at the top. Again, I'm going to press the I key over here with my mouse in the middle. Let's press the I key. And I'm going to choose location, rotation, and scale. When I do that, notice on the right-hand side, it goes from green to yellow. Yellow means my keyframe has been captured. Green means we've moved it out of the initial base pose, but nothing has been captured. And sometimes when we start off with Blender, beginners forget to press the I key. And they're like, oh, man, I moved it, and it was in the exact position. I forgot to capture it. Yes, you're right, but you can always undo, right? You can always undo, move yourself back, and then press the I key. All right, so this is the first one. So, and now what I want to do is I want to move my scrubber to the, to when the object gets to the ground. Now for this one, to make it easy, I'm going to go to the front view, and I'm going to go to orthographic mode. And you can see that there, let's zoom in a little bit, dropping straight down. And what I want to do is when I come to here, to this position right here, I want this object to change from stretching to squashing, right? So again, what I want to do is I want to move this object down. And I want to move it down so that you can see where it's going to be, right kind of in the middle here. And if you want to be numeric about it, you can see that this should be at the 0 pose. This is where it should be, 0 on the Z-axis. And what I want to do now is change these, reverse these. So instead of this scale being 0.5, I want to go to 2. Same thing with the Y-axis. So move that so it's flatter. And then the Z-axis is going to go to 0.5. Now you can see that this particular thing would take me underneath the ground. So I'm going to move it. I'm going to position it up a little bit so it becomes just above the ground. And it should be around 0.5 would be the exact position. All right, so cool. So this is my next position, right? And then I want to capture this as a keyframe. Again, I'm going to use the I key and then location, rotation, and scale. All right, so what do I got here so far? So if you go up, let me just scroll back out. I can scroll up with a scrubber. You can see what it's going to look like. It's going to come up. And then it's going to stretch until it hits the ground where it squashes. So you're going to get that stretch and squash thing going on, right? There's that first part. I'll zoom it in so you can see it a little better. And pull it down here so you can see it from the base. Yeah, so what it's doing, what Blender is doing is it's interpolating each frame between the keyframes by creating an in-between. So it does all the in-betweening for you, right? So this is great. So it means that it makes people like us who are non-artists, right? It makes us look like superstars because we understand the 12 principles of animation, right? We're using Blender to do this stuff. And by the way, Blender can be used to make a 2D movie as well as a 3D movie, right? So you can see that it moves from one part to the other. There we go. And now what I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of bounce up. I wanted to kind of have a course that goes this way. Now, typically what we can do is if you're an artist, you might be able to use the grease pencil that's part of Blender to kind of drag and draw your path. And I didn't do that in the first section, so I'm not going to do it here. But basically what you do is like literally like drawing on the screen. And it kind of gives you the path that you want to do so you can kind of give yourself an idea of what you're doing. Now, to find the grease pencil, typically, basically, it's on the left-hand side. So I'm going to kind of see if I can find it for you here. And if you can't find it, let me see if I can. Here it is. Here's the grease pencil. So what I can do is I can draw the path that I want, right? Here's my grease pencil. What I can do is I can say, well, I want the path of the object to kind of follow something like this. Now, I'm drawing with my mouse, so I apologize. But you can see the path. And if I want to undo that, I can do that, and I can draw it again. So kind of a natural-looking thing that kind of comes up and maybe drops down like this. All right, so that's kind of the path I want to follow. The grease pencil is actually an object that I can remove. I can select it and remove that particular path. Think about it as a path in Illustrator or something, and it's actually in 3D. So if I actually look at it, you can see that it's physically in 3D on the screen, which is kind of cool, right? So again, I don't have to use this, but it's just a guide, and then I can remove it later. All right, so again, one thing, so well, first of all, how do I delete it? If I click erase, I can actually physically erase the grease pencil, right? So I can kind of, go there and erase it. Oops, undo. And let's just, how about we don't do that right now? Click away. And I want to click erase, right? So I can choose the area that I want to erase in the grease pencil, right? If I didn't want it. Okay, so I can physically erase the grease pencil. And we're going to have to do that later on. But the idea here is that the grease pencil, when I import it into Blender or into Unity, is not going to take. It's not going to move in from one to the other. All I'm going to see is this part. So I can notice on the outliner, I have my grease pencil right here. And I could literally select my grease pencil here, and I can turn it off so I don't have to see it, right? It's just a guide for me to figure out what I'm doing in the world. Okay, so very, very useful thing. Some people like to use it, some people don't. I'm going to use it just because I mentioned it, but I didn't do that in the first two sections. So, okay, fine. So I got a basic path of what I want to do with my next, the next part of my cube. So I want to move my scrubber to the next frame. So here's my next frame. Notice that it turns from yellow to green. Green indicating that there's no change in my keyframes. I haven't captured the position. And what I want to do here is I want to move this thing. So I want to press the G key. So right-click, press the G key, and move it in the path. So here's where I think it should be from what I drew. And I want to rotate this, right, so that it rotates kind of like this. Okay, so this is where it is. And then I want to capture this. So I'm going to press I to capture and then enter, which kind of captures the rotation, location, and scale. I want to move this. Now, remember what we said. At the top is where we do slow in, slow out. That's another principle of animation, right? We do more frames as we approach the top and less frames as we come down to the bottom, right, for the first run. So I'm going to do more frames here. So instead of going right to 20, I want to add the keyframe, which is up here. So I'll do the keyframe 20, which is going to be this one at the top. But I'm going to add more frames in here to slow it down, right? So I'm going to go to the next one. So I'm going to grab this, press the G key, move it to where it's supposed to be in the top. So this is my arc, the top of the arc, right? And then rotate it. So again, it should be something like this, right? It doesn't have to be perfect, because remember, it's just an object that we're drawing. And then capture it. So rotation, location, and scale. And then what I want to do is go back, scrub back So inside here in the middle, right, I want to make some adjustments. Now you can capture this one, but what I want to do is I want to move this slightly higher, right? So I went back, I scrubbed back, right, into this thing, right? So I'm in here, and then I'm going to press I for location, rotation, and scale. I'm going to move again, another keyframe in, so closer to the top, right? Just before we get in there, I'm going to capture that. I think it's almost perfect, location, rotation, and scale. And then, if you notice, I've got more frames, so more control as I come up here, whoop, right? So kind of slow in and then slow out. So my next keyframe is going to be just like kind of like this one. So this is the one where I was here at this stage. I want to kind of go over here down. So I'm going to press this G key again, move the frame so it's kind of right about approximately right here. And then kind of rotate it, rotate it a little bit so it kind of follows where it's supposed to go. Right, there it is. Maybe bring it down just a touch so we're in line with that little path that I drew. And then press I to capture the keyframes. Now I can go back into the middle somewhere, and you can see that I can adjust this one. So maybe up here a little bit. I can press I, location, rotation, and scale, and maybe towards the end, you know what, let's capture that again. Now it's not perfect, but it's okay. It gives us more information that I'm capturing here to give me a more of a smooth path. So what I got now is something like that looks like this, right? Something else that I wanted to do at the top is change the shape of my object, right, from this stretch and squash shape, right, to more of square shape. And I can do that. I can kind of go in here and say, well, let's change my proportions back. So I want to make the back to 1. So if I did this, so let's move back to 1. I want to capture this keyframe, so I'm changing my keyframe. I can do that too. So I can, again, if I scrub in, I can see that I kind of move out. I go to here. So I want to move from here to here, and you see that now because I've captured these in-betweens right here, I'm going to get more of a square shape before I come down this way, right? So this one works okay. Take a look, because I'm moving from here to here, right? That's okay. But the problem that I had was I moved from here to here because I captured this keyframe. So if I want to delete the keyframe, I can use Alt-I, right? Or Option-I on the Mac, and I can delete that keyframe. Right? And now you can see that there's more of a transition that Blender will do for me. I don't want to work hard. I want Blender to work for me. So now I can capture that keyframe there, right? Which is more accurate than the one I had before. So kind of more of a boom, right? So it kind of comes up. And this is something new too. Take a look at how it's coming up. From here, it's like it's not stretching up properly. I'm rotating it right away, which is kind of weird, right? And I don't want that. I kind of want to rotate it the other way, actually. It shouldn't be rotating this way. Maybe it's going to be rotating the other way. All right, so it should kind of come up and rotate to the right, right? Because that's not what I wanted, but Blender tried to figure out what I wanted, right? So again, I could erase all these keyframes and start over, or I could move it the other way around. So in other words, instead of rotating this way, I could rotate the other way, and I just have to go to this thing here and change the rotation. So instead of the rotation being what it is, and if you look at the Euler rotation angle, I'm at minus 43.9. I could change this, so I could kind of, change the angle altogether. So I want to make it this way. This is the control you have, right? Like you can see what the control is, and then I can recapture that particular frame. And the same thing goes here. If I don't change it, it's gonna flip, right? Because that's what it keeps track of. So again, I want to kind of go in here and then flip it so that it's the other way, right? And I got to be very careful because if I flip it the wrong way, that would be bad, right? So again, what I mean is this is 135, and I'm moving into territory where I'm negative. I should be something positive. So again, something positive. Instead of 135, it should be something like this, 172, right? And again, I can recapture that frame. So I'm showing you how to fix stuff. Again, same thing here, right? So I can move this one. So it's the positive one, not the negative one. And capture. And the same thing goes with this one. So you can see I'm capturing all these frames, and this one is okay. You see that? 176, no, it's not. And let's move it so that it's way over there. Right, but it should be closer to 180 at the top, right? And let's capture that one. And the same thing goes with the next one. So now this one here is going to rotate even more. So I'm just fixing them. And rotate more. And capture that one. All I'm doing is recapturing all the frames as we move forward. And again, if I'm not happy, it's okay. We can fix it. And one more, right? Because we need to land. So the landing is going to be somewhat down here. So I'm moving, again, the scrubber so it's down closer. I want to move this one so it's near the bottom. In fact, I'll put it on the bottom. So I'll say this one, it's got to move down to here, right? Let's make it so it's zeroed out on the 0 for now. And then I'll rotate it that way too. So I kind of rotate it so that it is this way. That's how I want it to land. So it's again at 270 exactly, right? But the stretch and squash has to change. So I'm going to go into, again, this will stretch. So I'm going to go to 0.5 here and 0.5 there. But this one should be 2. Like that. All right, so kind of move this like down here. And if I capture it, location, rotation, and scale, you can see if I scrub from here to there, it's okay, but we have some problems in between, like this one, how it goes out of track, right? It's not doing what I want it to do, it's doing what Blender wants to do. So I kind of add some additional keyframes by moving this over, and I press that. Yes, because I didn't give enough information for Blender to figure out what I wanted, right? And I can add some other ones closer to the bottom, right? And if I find that, for example, that's kind of weird, right? Like this is okay, but maybe what I want to do is more of, like you can see the proportions on this side. It's trying to give us proper proportions, right? I can make it so that it's less on one. I can change this so that I can pull this back, let's say, making it still a little bit longer, so like 1.6, let's say. I can actually physically change the properties of what I want, and this will be a little, obviously, smaller, 1.2, right? Again, I'm using by eye principle, but I can do this and I can press the I key to guide Blender to know what I want. So I can kind of go here and boom. So it's going to go boom, right? So the whole thing goes bang and moves. And that's weird. Look at this. So it comes here and then goes like this. And smashes down again, right about here. Okay, so that's kind of the bounce, right? And I can continue this. So let's say, for example, I want to move one more. I'll continue from this, right? So again, I want to create another shape, and just to keep in mind how far I bounced, right? So you can see how I want to bounce maybe half as big over here. So I want to kind of go half as big, and so what I want to do again is just draw the grease pencil. So I'll take the grease pencil and I'll draw it just half as much. So kind of do one of these, right? And if I really want to, I can kind of do one of the next one. So I got those two things right there. So it's bang, bang, right? So it's a little bit closer. And I've got an idea of what I want to do with my grease pencil. All right, so cool. I have my next part, but I don't have enough frames. So let's add some more frames. So right now I'm ending at 30. Let's add 30 more frames. So we'll go to 60. All right, and again, I want to move this whole thing. So I'm going to press Shift, middle button, or middle track wheel to the right so I can see where I'm at. And I've got my scrubber up here. And what I want to do is, as it lands, it's going to flip this way, right? So, okay, flip this way. So I'm going to go to this one. It's going to flip this way to move up. So what I wanted to do is from here, right? I want to come to about here, right? So let's move my my object to about here, let's say, roughly. And flip it the other way. So flip it this way. Okay, so that's what my next keyframe is going to look like, right? And I can capture that. Location, rotation, and scale. Let's go back and see what that looks like. So from here, it's going to go ba-bam, right? Okay, so it goes like this. Notice how it goes from here to here. So I got some keyframes to worry about. Like in here, that's definitely wrong. So I can kind of bring that up, kind of being here. I want to spin it even more, right? And maybe, you know, just kind of start rotating even more than it was before, and I can capture that. So I give Blender a little bit more of what I want. So it goes like this, right? A little bit more, a little smoother as it comes out from this one, right? And again, I want to capture at the top, so I want to kind of go over here to this this 40th keyframe, and again, I want to press the G key to move this thing to the top of my arc approximately, rotate it to there, capture it, right? And then I can continue. I'll do the in-betweens in a second, like the extremes, all right? And then again, I will grab this one. So move first of all my scrubber, right? Grab this one, move it to here, approximately just before it lands, because I want it to squash again. And then rotate it this way. Okay, so there it is. And I want to capture that one. Cool. And what I want to do here is, for the next one, which is going to be over here, way over here, I want it to land and squash. So this one is going to go here. It's going to go down to here, which is going to be at the 0 point. Let's move this to the 0 point, right? I'm going to rotate this so it's right at a particular angle. So it looks like it's 540, which is right. And then I'm going to move this into the proper proportions. So this is going to be 2. And this is going to be 0.5. And we're going to move this up a little bit so it's above the line this time. Probably forgot to do that earlier, but we can fix that. And then capture that. Okay, cool. Now let's do the in-between. Let's see how that looks. So I go back. So this is pretty cool. Yeah, but maybe I want to add some more information there. So I can see that, you know, I probably want some at the top. So here, before it comes down, I want to have another keyframe in there. And when it's coming up, I want to kind of have another keyframe in there. Maybe a little bit lower, but that's probably okay. And then as it comes down, it's going to kind of squash in. So before it squashes, maybe out here, let me move this back a little bit. There we go. I'll add a keyframe in there. And then the next one is going to be where it kind of comes out to here. And this time I'm just going to get it to kind of fold out, like actually rotate around and then fall. That's what I'm going to make it do. So, but now I have a problem because if I rotate it from here, it's going to rotate from the middle, and I don't want that. So let's talk about changing the rotation or the orientation of an object. Right now, my object is centered. My pivot point is in the middle of my object. I don't want that. I want my pivot point to be on the corner right here. It's going to land here, and what I want to do is pivot from here, and it's going to fall, right? So what I can do is I can use my 3D cursor to kind of target where that is. And then down here on this line, I can change the pivot point from the median of the object to my 3D cursor. And then what I can do is, when I capture this next keyframe, right, I want it to start pivoting so that it is completely out. So what I want to do is I don't want it to shift necessarily. I want it to do something like this. I want to say rotate, right? And it's going to rotate from here, right? And it's going to be here. Because this is the final position. But it can't be from 1 to nowhere because that doesn't make sense, right? I'm kind of zooming in here. Whoa, there, something like that. There we go. This is where I want it to be. And I'll capture that. But I want another keyframe in here because it's going to do something like this. Look, it's going to shift from here to where it's supposed to be, right? Which is not what I want, right? So somewhere in between, like somewhere around right here, I want to make it so it's straightened up. And what I can do here is I can move this up, and I can move this back, right? So I want that pivot point to be maintained here. That's where I'm going to pivot from. And I can add a keyframe in there. And now I can check between these two. So how does this look? It's still not perfect because from here to here to here, right? It looks like it's lifting up and settling down again, right? I don't want it to go below the line, so I'm going to put another one here. So it means I'm going to move this up. So again, the pivot point is where my 3D cursor is, so approximately right there. So I'll capture that keyframe. And then let's see how it does it now. It does now. Let's see if it's a little better. Boom, and then here, right? So look, right? So you kind of see what's happening. All I'm doing is capturing the positions. I change the scale, location, rotation. I'm capturing all that information, and all the Blender's doing is it's using it as morph targets. I want you to think of it like this, right? So it's morphing my shape based on the keyframes that I'm giving it, okay? By the way, in C++, you can use morph targets the exact same way. I can export all my keyframes. You can import them as OBJs. And for every OBJ, you can interpolate between each of the keyframes to create this morph target idea, where the mesh morphs from one set of vertices into another. All you're doing is moving the vertices and rotating the vertices in your object when you're rendering it. Okay, cool. So I think I've got my animation. It's kind of weird. Maybe in the last keyframe, I'll set a few things here. I want to, it was a square. I want to make it into a square. So it's going to kind of have to rest, right? That's the other thing I want to do. So in my next keyframe, so maybe around, again, keyframe 60, right? I want to make this thing rest. So it's going to go back down to its normal shape. So it's going to go 1, 1, and 1. And let me undo that. Let me go back to here, actually. That'll undo it nicely for me. I want to go here, and I want to change my pivot point to the median. There we go. Let's try that again. So 1, 1, and 1. I don't want it to move positions. I just want it to rest. So I'm going to kind of bring it down to here, which should be around 1 above now, and capture that. Let's see how that looks, right? So it's going to be like, right? And you know what? I want to get some extra keyframes in here because I don't want it to be so drastic. So maybe keyframe in there, and maybe even a keyframe in every one of these ones, here and here. And we want this idea of stretch and squash and follow through, right? So remember what we said with follow through is it's going to come up, so deform a little bit, and then come back down, right? So it's going to come to this point. Maybe what it'll do is it'll squash in and then come up and come right back to rest again. So more keyframes. So let's add some more. So we'll go on from 60, we'll go to, let's say, 70. Right, so here it's at the resting stage at the bottom. We're going to make it squash down at 55, 65, I mean. So again, I'm not moving it physically. All I'm doing is changing the scale. So I'm going to go to, from the X, I'm going to go back down to 0.5, or sorry, 2 on the X and Y. What rotation is it? Nope, I was right the first time, 0.5. 0.5 on the Y, 2 on the Z, right? And I'm going to move it down to where it's supposed to be. So again at 0.5. Capture that. So it's going to go something like, right? So it's going to come down to here. It's going to stretch down and then come up higher over here, let's say. So let's move this up higher. So now we're going to go back to the other one. So we're going to go back to 1. Let's put it back down to 1, 1, and 1. And move this up a little bit, back to 1. Okay. Capture this at a bigger shape. So if I go bigger, then it's going to go higher but slimmer, right? So I'm going to go just slightly higher. So it's going to go higher on the X, just slightly. So if I go, let's say 1.2 here, 1.2, and 1.2 on the Y, and then on this one, it's going to be 0.8. Okay, and then what I can do is, this should be 1.2, approximately. So I'll capture that one. What I'm doing is I'm actually doing that follow through. Boom, and then up, and then rest again. So then let's go to 75, right? So here's 75 where it comes back to rest. So then it's going to go to 1, 1, and 1. And move this down to 1. And capture that. right, so what's the effect? Let's see if it even looks good. So, boom, we're going to come in, squash down, come up, and then rest, right? And if you want to, you can add additional keyframes in here just to add more information, to give Blender a chance to do some calculations. We can also use this information later, as you'll see. All right, cool. Questions around this process. So all this is me moving an object around in space, capturing the object in different positions. Now, how does this thing look? So if I zoom out, and if I want to not see the grease pencil, let's just make the grease pencil invisible. So I don't want to see that. And I come back all the way. Right? So here I'm at the beginning of my animation. Looks big. I'm going to zoom this in so you can see all the keyframes that I've added, right? And if I scroll out, I can go right to the front. And what you can do, of course, is press the play button here to play your animation. Let's make it a little bigger so you can see it. So it goes kind of like this, bang, 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 right? Some of it doesn't look right. How can I change the timing? Well, remember, we're using our eye to figure out how this works, right? And to bring it a little bit closer so you can see, I'm going to take away the toolbar for a second and this bar here. Bring this down so we can really see it and zoom in a little bit, right? So here, ba-boom, 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 right? If something doesn't look right, man, can anyone tell me what that is? So boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. Anybody? Yeah. Kind of slow down in midair, right? It kind of has, why? Because it's slow. Remember, more frames slower, less frames faster, right? So I've slowed it down because of what I've done. And the way to combat that is to put your frames closer together. But how the heck do I move my frames now? I've got my keyframes. I can go and undo them and redo them, but what a pain that would be, right? So there's another mode we can use. Instead of going into default mode, we can go into animation mode. And what we have here is the same kind of idea. We still have our animation, our timeline down here. But let's focus on what we like to call the dope sheet. Actually, animators like to call it. I can't include we, as in me in that, because I'm not an animator. But if you notice up here, what I can do is I can use I can scroll in, just like you normally can for objects. I can scroll in, so I can see all of my keyframes in their glory. Now this is important because what I can do, let's move this over here, is I can see how they are distributed. I'll take a look on the right. So this is, so I don't need this part so much. I can move this to the left. But on the right, I see my motion, right? And again, I can make this so it looks like I saw it in my screen. So from the front, I can see my action, right? So, and I can zoom out so I can see everything the way I like, just give myself an idea of what it looks like. So I want to keep an eye on this stuff because I want to forget it, but I want to use the left to kind of get an idea of what the motion looks like. All right. So a couple things, right? I mean, it almost seems like as if there's not enough fall for the first one. So take a look at this. So I'm going to kind of zoom in here so you can see it. Can't see it because it's so far away. Bang. Okay, so see that? It's almost like I want it to fall faster. Remember how I do that? Less frames. So on the left, take a look at all this stuff. I have access to all the location, rotation, and scale of each of my axes, right? Now they're all unlocked right now, okay? So what I can do is I can specify the X location or the Z location in this particular case, and I can close off the rest of them. So I can close off these ones as an example, right? But I want to modify my X's, and I can change the way I rotate them or move them. The other thing I can do is, before I go into that, I can deselect all, just like I normally do with any model, right? And I can select all by pressing A, and then press S to scale. And what that'll do is it actually presses my frames together a little bit. So make it more of a faster animation. Notice that I can reduce the space between my keyframes. What this also does is it shifts the animation so it starts later, right? So then I can press G and move my frame so it's closer to the left. Again, as I scroll in, I can see more detail, and so now I understand what's happening here. I can move this aside, so I can kind of say, okay, cool. This is my dope sheet again, so I can move it as wide as I want. Maybe that's a little bit too much, so I can see the whole thing. But you can see that I can probably scale in my animation. I want to start closer to 1, so I can press G, and I can move my animation towards the left. That's on frame 1, right? And that's my entire animation, right? So I can compress the frames. I can take each of the frames, just like if they were an object, and scale them in so that my whole object is a little bit more compressed. So I can do that. So a faster animation. So it finishes quicker. Let's try that again. So scale, and I'm going to move in. Now, do too much and you lose information. So let's just do it to about there. Then press the G key and move that over so it's on frame 1. And I get a much faster animation now. Let's take a look at that. So if I go over here, you can see it's a little bit faster. That's one thing you can do. You can make it so that the animations, the keyframes are closer together, and you can do that with the scaling, with a dope sheet. The other thing you can do, which is really cool, is you can use the curves themselves. So on the bottom here, there's another area here, which is F curves. Okay, this is pretty cool. Just wanted to present this to you as well. So if you look on the bottom, you can see that I captured location, rotation, and scale. But there's certain aspects that I really care about more than others. For example, my Y and my Z. All right, so here's my Z. My Z graph is right here. And I can make these visible or invisible, and I can also lock them out. So let's lock out my Euler angles, Euler angles is what I should say, and my scale. So I don't care about those. I don't care about the X right now, so I can lock that all up. Okay, but I do care about my Y and my Z. So I can kind of lock up the Y for now. And you can even make them invisible. If I don't want to see those graphs, I don't have to. So all I'm looking at now is the Z graph. And what the Z graph is, it tells me a story about my position. So that's what it is. So if you notice my positions, if I undo that, I see these points. Well, guess what I can do? Just like I select objects' vertices, right, in modeling, I can select these points in space, right? So I can do something like this. Well, what if I wanted my object to start at a higher point? This is the initial point of my object. So what I can do here is I can press G, and I can move this object higher up. And now you can see that the effect it'll have. It'll actually move this a lot faster because I'm starting at a higher level. So it changes my keyframe, right? Same thing goes if I want to make this bounce a little higher, right? So if I go to my first bounce, and again, I can zoom in here like I normally would, so you can see more details. This is my bounce. This is how high it goes. You can see that there's not much bounce over here, but I can physically change, right, how high I bounce for the second round. So I can kind of zoom in, hit that one, and then press the G key and kind of pull this out if I really want to. Now, I create some weird effects sometimes. Watch. Right? Sometimes, especially because there's more frames in here, let's undo that change. And let's select a bunch of them. So A to deselect all, press B for B select, select the ones that I want, and then press G to drag them out, kind of all together, make them a higher bounce, right? Which is more realistic. So as you can see, there's some really cool things you can do with Blender in terms of not just the keyframing, but you can also go into this animation tool, which allows you to look at something called the dope sheet, which is all the keyframes in one place, as well as I can look at the F curves because we're looking at motion graphics. We can change the curve of the motion graphic for our different elements we've captured, different properties we've captured in terms of position, rotation, and scale, and we can modify them here as well to create whatever effect we want. So really cool stuff, guys. Now, this is great. You're going to say, but how the heck do I use this in Unity? Let's go back to default. I've got my little bounce, right? It's a little better now. Still needs work, but I'm not going to spend time doing it because that's not what I do. I do have a longer animation than I need, right? That's one thing. So I can chop off some of these frames. Looks like I can probably go to about frame 53 and chop it off. So I'm going to go there and change my end frame to about frame 53. So I don't need more frames than that. The more frames I have, the more information I'm storing with my file. Yes? Well, it's up to you. It's up to you with the effect you want, how it repeats. We'll talk about that when I do I'm going to do a coin. You'll see how that works, right? All right. So here I want to capture this. I'm going to say File, Save. I'm going to save my blend file, and this will be the cube animation, right, .blend. And I want to save it on my desktop, of course, because that's where I've been saving stuff for you guys. So here's my desktop, save. And what I want to do now is export this animation to bring it into Unity. So File, Export, and I'm going to go to FBX. I'm going to export it as an FBX file. Two things. I need to turn on selected objects. So that's the only one I want. I don't want my grease pencil to come in from somehow. I don't want my lights to come in. I don't care about anything else, just the thing I've got selected. Okay? The next thing I want is just the mesh. So that's the next thing I'm select. I'm not going to carry in the armature or the lamps or anything else. I'm going to select the mesh only, right? So if I select everything, everything will come in with your model. I don't care about everything. I only care about certain things. Okay, cool. So I'm going to save this cube animation.fbx on the desktop, and it's done. Next, I'm going to launch Unity. And before I go there, so I talked about basic animation in Blender, I'm going to stop recording. So the next thing I'm going to do is start bringing things in from Blender to Unity, and we'll talk about the Unity project I'm going to make. Let's take a short rest from this video, and I'll come back with the next one.